The rain drummed steadily against the windshield as I sat in my car outside U-Store on Highway 35, just outside Austin, Texas. The keys felt cold and heavy in my palm, two small pieces of metal that represented the final loose end in settling Mom's estate. 3 weeks had passed since the funeral, and I'd been putting off this trip to her storage unit. Something about it felt too final, too much like closing the book on her life completely. The facility looked exactly like every other storage place in America. Rows of identical orange roll-up doors stretching across a concrete lot, surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with barbed wire. Security cameras perched on tall poles like mechanical vultures, watching over the accumulated possessions of people's lives. I'd driven past places like this 1,000 times without giving them a second thought. Now, one of those anonymous units contained whatever Mom had deemed important enough to pay for every month, but never important enough to mention. The August heat hit me like a wall as I stepped out of the air-conditioned car. Even at 10 in the morning, the Texas sun was already merciless, and I could feel sweat beginning to form under my collar as I walked toward the office. The clerk, a heavy-set woman with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, barely looked up from her computer screen when I entered. "Help you?" she asked, her fingers continuing to click across the keyboard. "I'm here about Unit 247, I said, placing the death certificate and probate documents on the counter. "My mother, Eleanor Hartman, passed away last month. I need to settle her account." The woman's expression softened slightly as she glanced at the papers. "I'm sorry for your loss, hun. Eleanor was a good tenant, never missed a payment in... Let me see here." She clicked through several screens. 12 years, always paid 3 months in advance, always kept to herself. Real quiet lady. 12 years. I tried to remember what had been happening in Mom's life 12 years ago. I was finishing college, starting my first job at the accounting firm in Dallas. She'd seemed fine then, the same as always. Quiet, reserved, keeping busy with her garden and her book club. What could she possibly have needed a storage unit for? Did she come by often? I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. Maybe once a month, sometimes less. Always during the day, weekdays mostly. She'd drive that little blue Honda of hers and park right in front of Unit 247. Never stayed long, maybe 20-30 minutes at most. The clerk pulled out a clipboard thick with forms. "Now, since you're the executor, I'll need you to sign here and initial there. The account's paid up through next month, so you've got time to clear it out." As I signed the papers, my mind wandered to all the conversations Mom and I had shared over the years. We talked regularly, every Sunday phone call, holiday visits, the occasional weekend when I'd drive down to her house in Round Rock to help with yard work or repairs. Not once had she mentioned a storage unit. Not once had she hinted at needing extra space for anything. The clerk handed me a second set of keys along with a printed map of the facility. "Unit 247 is in the back section near the fence. You'll want to bring your own padlock when you're done. We had to cut hers off to verify the contents for the probate court. Standard procedure." I thanked her and walked back into the oppressive heat, following the narrow asphalt road that wound between the rows of storage units. The numbers counted up slowly: 220, 225, 230. My footsteps echoed off the metal doors, each one hiding someone else's secrets, someone else's overflow of life. I wondered how many of these units contained forgotten treasures, and how many were filled with junk that seemed important once upon a time. Unit 247 sat at the end of a row, shaded by a large oak tree that had probably been there long before the storage facility was built. The orange door was identical to all the others, except for the conspicuous absence of a padlock where the hasp hung open. I grabbed the handle at the bottom of the door and took a deep breath. The metal door rolled up with a screech of protest, revealing a space about the size of a one-car garage. But instead of the boxes and furniture I'd expected, I found something that made my breath catch in my throat. The unit was organized with almost military precision. Along the left wall, dozens of manila folders hung in a filing system made from repurposed wooden crates. The right side held several plastic storage containers, each labeled with dates going back years. And in the center of the space sat an old wooden desk with a high-backed chair, as if Mom had been conducting some kind of business here. But it was the far wall that truly stopped me in my tracks. Dozens of photographs were pinned to a large corkboard, connected by red string like something from a detective movie. The images showed people I'd never seen before, places I didn't recognize, and documents covered in what looked like my mother's handwriting. Below the corkboard, a small safe sat open, revealing stacks of cash and what appeared to be multiple passports. I stepped into the storage unit, my heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and dread. This wasn't the organized accumulation of someone who'd simply run out of closet space. This was something else entirely, something deliberate and secretive. The air inside smelled faintly of vanilla and old paper, the same scent that had always clung to Mum's house, but here it felt different, foreign. I approached the desk first, running my fingers along its worn surface. A small reading lamp sat in one corner, next to a magnifying glass, and several pens arranged in perfect parallel lines. In the center of the desk lay an open notebook filled with Mom's familiar handwriting, but the words didn't make sense. Dates, names, locations, all written in what appeared to be some kind of code or shorthand. The first entry I could decipher was dated just 3 months ago. Package delivered to Chicago contact, payment confirmed. Next shipment scheduled for September. Package, contact, shipment? These weren't words I associated with my quiet, retired mother, who spent her days tending to her roses and volunteering at the local library. As I flipped through more pages of the notebook, a photograph fell out from between the pages. It showed a woman who looked remarkably like my mother, but younger, maybe in her 30s. She was standing next to a man I'd never seen before, both of them smiling in front of what appeared to be a European cityscape. The woman wore expensive-looking clothes and jewelry that I'd certainly never seen Mom own. On the back, someone had written Milan, 1995 in handwriting that definitely wasn't Mom's. I would have been 15 years old then, a sophomore in high school. That was the year Mom had supposedly taken that genealogy research trip to visit some distant relatives back east. She'd been gone for 2 weeks, and when she returned, she'd seemed different somehow, more reserved, more careful about what she said and where she went. At the time, I'd attributed it to her grief over Dad's death the year before. Now I wondered if there had been something else entirely going on. I set the photograph aside and opened the first filing cabinet. The folders were labeled with names I didn't recognize and dates spanning over 2 decades. Each folder contained what appeared to be correspondence, letters in multiple languages, many of which had been opened and resealed multiple times. Some bore foreign postmarks from countries I knew Mom had never visited: Switzerland, Singapore, the Cayman Islands. The implications began to sink in as I stood there in the sweltering storage unit, surrounded by evidence of a life I'd never known existed. My mother, the woman who'd raised me to value honesty above all else, who'd never missed a church service or forgotten to send a birthday card, had been living some kind of double life for decades. But as shocking as these discoveries were, they were nothing compared to what I found when I opened the first plastic storage container. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper and arranged with the same meticulous care as everything else in the unit, were documents that would shatter everything I thought I knew about Eleanor Hartman and about myself. The first document I pulled from the container made my hands tremble. It was a birth certificate, yellowed with age but still clearly legible. The name read Eleanor Kowalski, born in Chicago, Illinois, in 1952, the same birth year as my mother, but a completely different name. Below it, I found a social security card for Elena Kowalski, a driver's license from Illinois dated 1970, and a passport that had expired decades ago. I sank into the chair at the desk, struggling to process what I was seeing. Elena Kowalski, not Eleanor Hartman. The woman who had raised me, who had bandaged my scraped knees and taught me to ride a bike, who had worked double shifts at the diner to keep us afloat after Dad died. She wasn't who she'd claimed to be. The passport photo showed a young woman who was unmistakably my mother, but her hair was darker, her expression more guarded than in any family photo I'd ever seen. The passport bore stamps from countries across Europe and South America, with dates ranging from the early 1970s through the mid-1980s. According to the family history Mom had always told me, she'd barely left Texas before marrying Dad in 1978. I continued digging through the container, each discovery more bewildering than the last. There were bank statements for accounts in names I didn't recognize, property deeds for addresses in cities I'd never heard her mention, and correspondence with lawyers and financial advisors spanning multiple decades. The amounts of money involved made my accountant's brain reel. Wire transfers in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, investment portfolios worth more than most people's houses. One letter, dated just 6 months before Mom's death, caught my attention. It was typed on expensive letterhead from a law firm in Switzerland. Dear Ms. Kowalski, as requested, we have completed the transfer of funds from the Zurich account to the trust established for your son. The documentation has been prepared according to your specifications, with the revelation protocol to be activated upon presentation of the storage unit contents to the designated beneficiary. We understand this has been a difficult decision after so many years of maintaining operational security. Please know that your service will not be forgotten, and your son's future is now secure regardless of any complications that may arise. With our deepest respect, Johann Weber and Associates Service. Operational security. The language sounded almost military, or worse, like something from a spy novel. I read the letter 3 times, but it raised more questions than it answered. What kind of service had Mom provided? Why had she needed operational security? And what was this trust that had been established in my name? I found partial answers in the next folder. It contained what appeared to be employment records, but not for any job I'd known about. The documents showed payments from something called Continental Logistics, with notations like courier services, European sector, and asset management, South American operations. The payments were substantial and regular, spanning from 1974 to just 2 years ago. One document included a performance evaluation dated 1986. Subject demonstrates exceptional reliability in high-stress assignments. Linguistic capabilities, German, Spanish, Italian, prove invaluable for cross-border operations. Recommend continued placement in family-integrated cover scenarios. Subject's emotional stability remains strong despite extended deep cover assignment. Deep cover assignment. Family-integrated cover scenarios. The clinical language made my stomach turn. Had her marriage to my father been part of some elaborate deception? Had I been part of her cover? I stood up abruptly, needing air, needing space to think. The storage unit suddenly felt claustrophobic, filled with the ghosts of lies and deceptions. Outside, the August heat seemed mild compared to the burning questions in my mind. I leaned against the oak tree, trying to reconcile the mother I'd known with the woman described in these documents. Eleanor Hartman had been predictable, safe, conventional. She'd worked at the diner, attended PTA meetings, worried about my grades and whether I was eating enough vegetables. Elena Kowalski apparently had been something else entirely, a woman who spoke multiple languages, traveled the world, and worked for organizations that required operational security. When I returned to the storage unit, I forced myself to approach the investigation methodically. I opened the remaining containers one by one, cataloging their contents like evidence in a case. The second container held photographs, hundreds of them. Some showed Mom, Elena, in various international locations, always with different people, often in what appeared to be surveillance photos taken from a distance. Others were clearly professional shots, the kind used for identification documents or personnel files. In one photograph, she was sitting at a cafe in what looked like Paris, passing an envelope to a man in an expensive suit. In another, she was boarding a plane with a briefcase handcuffed to her wrist. Each image showed a woman I'd never seen before, confident, alert, dangerous even. This wasn't the mother who'd fretted over my report cards and insisted I wear a coat when it was chilly. The third container contained the most disturbing discovery yet, detailed surveillance reports about me. Someone, presumably Mom herself, had been documenting my life with the thoroughness of a professional investigator. There were copies of my school records, employment history, even photographs of girlfriends I'd dated in college. The most recent entry was dated just weeks before her death. Subject continues normal routine. No indication of suspicion regarding family background. Recommend maintaining current level of separation until natural conclusion of assignment. Trust activation should proceed as planned upon my death. Assignment. Even in death, she'd been thinking of our relationship as part of some larger operation. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Everything, my entire life, my relationship with the woman I'd called mother, had it all been an elaborate lie. But then I found something that changed everything. Hidden at the bottom of the third container, wrapped in an old baby blanket I recognized from my childhood, was a letter addressed to me in Mom's handwriting. Not the clinical coded language of the other documents, but the familiar script I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists for 32 years. My dearest son, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found what I hoped you'd never have to see. I know these discoveries must be devastating, and I know you have every right to hate me for the deception, but please, before you judge me too harshly, let me tell you the truth I've carried alone for so long. Everything you've found is real. Elena Kowalski was my name before I became your mother. I did work for organizations that required secrecy and sacrifice. I did travel to dangerous places and do things that most people would find unforgivable. But none of it, was more real to me than the 32 years I spent being your mom. When I took this assignment in 1976, it was supposed to last 2 years. I was told to establish a cover identity in a small Texas town, to marry someone unremarkable, to become invisible while serving as a relay point for sensitive communications. Your father was never supposed to be anything more than a convenient facade, but then I fell in love with him. Really, truly fell in love for the first time in my life, and when you came along, everything changed. You weren't part of the mission. You were the mission's end. You became the most important thing in the world to me, more important than any oath I'd taken or any service I'd sworn to provide. I should have walked away then. I should have disappeared and let you both live normal lives. But I was selfish. I wanted to be your mother more than I wanted to be Elena Kowalski. So I made a deal with my handlers. I would continue to serve, but only in ways that wouldn't compromise my family. I became what they called a sleeper asset, available when needed, invisible when not. For 32 years, I lived 2 lives. During the day, I was your mother, and those were the happiest hours of my existence. At night, sometimes I would return to being Elena Kowalski, just long enough to handle a communication relay or manage a financial transfer. The money in those accounts, it was payment for services, but I never spent it on myself. Every dollar was saved for you, invested for your future, held in trust for the day when you might need it. I know this doesn't excuse the deception. I know it doesn't make up for the lies. But I need you to understand that being your mother was never the lie. That was the only true thing in my entire life. Everything else, Elena Kowalski, the missions, the cover identity, that was just what I did. Being Eleanor Hartman, being your mum, that was who I was. The people I worked for believe the assignment ended with my death. They think Elena Kowalski's secrets died with her. But you deserve to know the truth about where you came from and who your mother really was. More importantly, you deserve to know that every sacrifice I made, every lie I told, every dangerous thing I did, it was all to protect the one real thing in my life. You. I love you, sweetheart. I loved you from the moment you were born until the moment I drew my last breath. That was never part of the assignment. That was just love, pure and simple. Your mother, Eleanor, Elena. I read the letter twice before the tears made it impossible to continue. Outside, the Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the storage facility, but inside Unit 247, I sat in the shade of my mother's secrets and finally began to understand. She hadn't been living a double life. She'd been living 2 separate lives and choosing every day which one mattered more. The woman who'd raised me, who'd sacrificed everything for my happiness and security, had been real. The love in her eyes when she looked at me, the pride in her voice when she talked about my accomplishments, the way she'd held me when I was scared or hurt, that had all been genuine. Eleanor Kowalski might have been the spy, but Eleanor Hartman had been the mother. And for 32 years, she'd chosen to be Eleanor. But even as I began to forgive her deception, I realized that my discoveries in this storage unit were far from over. The corkboard on the far wall still awaited my attention, and something told me that the most important revelations were yet to come. After reading Mom's letter, I sat in silence for nearly an hour, letting her words sink in while the afternoon heat built steadily inside the storage unit. When I finally stood up, my legs felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath me had fundamentally shifted. In many ways, it had. Everything I'd believed about my family, my childhood, my very identity, it all needed to be re-examined through this new lens of truth. I approached the corkboard with a mixture of dread and fascination. Up close, the web of photographs and documents was even more complex than it had appeared from across the room. Red string connected dozens of images, creating a pattern that looked like something from a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. But this wasn't paranoia. This was the organizational system of a professional intelligence operative. The center of the web was a photograph of Mom taken sometime in the 1980s. From there, strings radiated outward to connect her image with dozens of other people. Some faces appeared in multiple photographs, suggesting they were significant contacts in whatever network she'd been part of. Others appeared only once, perhaps representing one-time encounters or brief assignments. I began studying the faces systematically, starting with those that appeared most frequently. One man, distinguished-looking with graying temples, appeared in at least a dozen different photographs, spanning what looked like 20 years. In some images, he was clearly much younger, wearing the fashionable suits of the 1970s. In others taken more recently, he appeared older and more weathered, but unmistakably the same person. A handwritten note pinned below his most recent photograph read, "Marcus Chen, primary contact, Singapore operations, never compromise." The urgency in those final two words, written in Mom's careful script, sent a chill down my spine. Another frequently appearing figure was a woman with striking platinum blonde hair who seemed to age backwards through the timeline of photos. The oldest images showed her as a mature woman in expensive clothing, while more recent photos revealed someone who'd clearly undergone extensive plastic surgery to maintain a youthful appearance. Her notation read, "Katerina Volkov, asset manager, European sector, extreme caution." But it was a third figure that truly captured my attention. Unlike the others, this person appeared only in surveillance-style photographs, always shot from a distance or at angles that suggested the subject was unaware of being photographed. The man looked to be in his 50s, with dark hair and an unremarkable appearance that would allow him to blend into any crowd. What made him significant was the notation beneath his photos. Director, real identity unknown, terminate on sight, terminate on sight. The phrase made my blood run cold. Whatever organization Mum had worked for, it clearly operated with life and death stakes. And apparently, she'd been actively hunting someone called only Director for years. I spent the next 2 hours methodically examining every photograph and document on the board. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of an international network that moved money, information, and people across borders with remarkable efficiency. Mom hadn't been just a minor player in this operation. She'd been a key node, someone trusted with significant responsibilities and dangerous knowledge. The documents revealed operations spanning 4 decades and 6 continents. There were records of art smuggling from war zones, financial transfers that circumvented international sanctions, and what appeared to be witness protection services for people fleeing various governments. Some operations seemed legitimately humanitarian, helping dissidents escape authoritarian regimes or protecting whistleblowers who'd exposed corporate corruption. Others fell into grayer areas that made me uncomfortable to even read about. One folder contained correspondence about an operation called Sanctuary Network. The documents described a system for helping people disappear completely. New identities, relocated families, financial support for starting over in different countries. The client list included names I recognized from news reports over the years. A Russian oligarch who'd testified against Putin's inner circle, a pharmaceutical executive who'd exposed safety cover-ups, several journalists who'd investigated organized crime connections to major corporations. Mum's role in these operations seemed to center on what the documents called financial architecture, creating untraceable money flows that could support people in hiding for years or decades. Her accounting background, which I'd always thought was mundane, had apparently made her invaluable to an organization that needed to move millions of dollars without leaving paper trails. But it was in the final folder that I found the information that would change everything I thought I knew about my own life. The folder was labeled simply Hartman Family, Active Protection, and contained documents that made my hands shake as I read them. The first document was a threat assessment dated 3 years ago. Subject, Michael Hartman, son of Elena Kowalski, Eleanor Hartman. Threat level, extreme source. Director and affiliated network intelligence indicates director has identified Elena's family integration and is planning to use son as leverage to force Elena's cooperation in upcoming Prague operation. Recommend immediate implementation of enhanced security protocols. Elena has refused extraction and relocation offers. Subject, son, remains unaware of situation and family background. Elena insists on maintaining cover until natural conclusion. Current status, active monitoring of subject's residence, workplace and social contacts. 3 attempts at approach by unknown operatives in past 6 months, all successfully interdicted by Elena's counter-surveillance. I had to read the document twice before its implications fully sank in. For the past 3 years, while I'd been living my normal life in Dallas, going to work, dating, visiting Mom on weekends, I'd been the target of some kind of international conspiracy. People had been trying to approach me, to use me as a weapon against Mom, and she'd been protecting me without my knowledge. The file contained surveillance photos of me that I'd never known were being taken. Images of me leaving my apartment building, sitting at my desk at the accounting firm, even eating lunch at the sandwich shop near my office. In several photos, I could see other people in the background who were clearly watching me, and in a few cases, there were red circles drawn around faces with notes like "intercepted before contact" or "neutralized by EK, neutralized." I didn't want to think too hard about what that might mean. The most recent entry in the file was dated just 1 week before Mom's death. Situation has escalated beyond sustainable levels. Directors Network is preparing for direct action against subject. Elena's health decline limits her ability to maintain effective protection. Recommend emergency protocols be activated immediately. Elena continues to refuse extraction offers for herself and subject. She has requested that truth be revealed to subject only after her death, with full disclosure of trust fund and protective measures. She believes son's natural death will end director's interest in family line. Note: Elena has established dead man protocols. If she dies under any circumstances other than verified natural causes, full network exposure will be automatically triggered through multiple international media contacts. Natural death. The phrase jumped out at me like a neon sign. The file suggested that Mom's death hadn't been as natural as the doctors had claimed. The official cause had been sudden cardiac failure, not uncommon for someone her age, especially given her history of heart problems. But now I wondered if there had been something more sinister involved. I continued reading through the file, discovering layer after layer of protection that Mom had built around me without my knowledge. She'd had people watching my apartment building, monitoring my workplace for suspicious activity, even conducting background checks on women I'd dated to ensure they weren't plants sent by hostile organizations. One document revealed that my job at the accounting firm hadn't been as random as I'd thought. Mom had apparently used her connections to ensure I was hired there because the company had existing security protocols that made it difficult for outside operatives to gain access to employees. Even my choice of apartment had been influenced by her behind-the-scenes maneuvering. The building had security features that most residents weren't aware of, including cameras monitored by people connected to Mom's network. For 32 years, I'd thought I was living an independent life, making my own choices and forging my own path. Now I discovered that every major decision I'd made had been subtly guided by a mother who was simultaneously protecting me from threats I'd never known existed. The final document in the folder was a letter addressed to me, but in different handwriting than Mom's earlier confession. This one was typed on the same Swiss letterhead I'd seen before. Mr. Hartmann, if you are reading this, Elena Kowalski has passed away and you have accessed her emergency protocols. We offer our condolences for your loss. Elena was a valued colleague and an extraordinary woman who sacrificed more than you will ever know to ensure your safety and happiness. By now you understand that your life has been under threat from hostile elements within the intelligence community. With Elena's death, these threats have not disappeared. They may have actually intensified. There are people who believe you have access to information that could damage their operations, regardless of whether this is actually true. We are prepared to offer you the same protection we provided your mother, but this will require significant changes to your life. You would need to relocate, assume a new identity, and sever contact with everyone you've known. It is not a decision to be made lightly. Alternatively, you may choose to remain in your current life, but you should understand the risks involved. Elena's dead man protocols provide some protection, but they are not foolproof. There are people who might consider eliminating you a worthwhile risk to prevent potential future complications. A secure phone has been placed in Safety Deposit Box 247 at First National Bank of Austin. The key is hidden behind the loose brick third from the left at the base of the oak tree outside Storage Unit 247. If you decide you need our help, use the phone to call the only number programmed into it. If you choose to remain in your current life, destroy the phone and never attempt to contact us. Choose carefully. Elena died believing she had given you a normal life, but normal lives can be very dangerous for people like you. Weber and Associates. I stared at the letter for a long time, trying to process what it meant. Even in death, Mom was still trying to protect me, still making arrangements for my safety, but she was also giving me a choice she'd never had, the chance to walk away from this world of shadows and secrets, or to embrace the truth about who I really was and where I'd come from. As the afternoon sun began to slant lower through the oak tree's branches, casting longer shadows across the storage unit, I realized that discovering Mom's secrets had been only the beginning. Now I had to decide what to do with the truth, and whether the normal life she'd died to preserve was worth the risks that came with it. The loose brick was exactly where the letter said it would be. Behind it, wrapped in waterproof plastic, was a small brass key. In my hand, it felt like the weight of destiny, small and cold, but capable of opening doors I might not want to walk through. As I stood there in the fading Texas heat, holding the key that could change everything, I heard a car engine approaching slowly down the service road between the storage units. Through the chain-link fence, I could see a black sedan with tinted windows moving deliberately toward the back section where Unit 247 was located. My mother's training, passed down through 32 years of subtle lessons I'd never consciously recognized, kicked in automatically. The car was moving too slowly, scanning too carefully. The driver was looking for something or someone. I pocketed the key and stepped deeper into the shadow of the oak tree, suddenly very aware that my discoveries in the storage unit might have attracted exactly the kind of attention Mom had spent decades trying to avoid. The black sedan crawled past my parked car and continued toward the end of the service road where Unit 247 was located. I pressed myself against the rough bark of the oak tree, grateful for the shadows it cast in the late afternoon sun. Through the gaps in the branches, I watched as the vehicle stopped about 50 yards away, positioning itself with a clear view of the storage unit's entrance. Two men emerged from the car with the fluid, controlled movements of professionals. They weren't trying to be subtle, they wanted to be seen. The message was clear. They knew I was here and they wanted me to know they knew. One was tall and lean, with close-cropped gray hair, wearing an expensive suit that seemed impractical for the Texas heat. The other was shorter and stockier, dressed in casual clothes that couldn't quite conceal what appeared to be a shoulder holster. I found myself analyzing their approach with skills I didn't remember learning. Mum's lessons had been subtle but comprehensive, teaching me to notice details, to read body language, to always have an exit strategy. At the time, I'd thought she was just naturally cautious, maybe overprotective because of Dad's early death. Now I understood she'd been preparing me for exactly this moment. The men split up without speaking, a coordination that suggested they'd worked together before. The suit approached the storage unit directly, while the casual one circled around to cover the back fence line. They were herding me, trying to limit my options, but they'd made one critical mistake. They assumed I was still inside Unit 247. I stayed perfectly still as the suit reached the open storage unit and called out in a voice that carried clearly across the facility, "Mr. Hartman, we know you're here. We just want to talk. We have information about your mother that you're going to want to hear." When no response came, he gestured to his partner, who moved closer to the fence line. I could see them both clearly now from my position behind the tree. The suit was older, maybe 60, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His partner was younger, more nervous, constantly scanning the area with the hypervigilance of someone expecting trouble. "Mr. Hartman," the suit continued, "your mother worked with us for many years. We know she left certain materials here that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. We're not your enemies. We're trying to protect you from people who are." It was a good approach, I had to admit. Reasonable, non-threatening, offering protection rather than making demands. If I hadn't spent the afternoon reading Mom's files and learning about the web of deception she'd navigated for decades, I might have been tempted to reveal myself. Instead, I used their focus on the storage unit to slip quietly along the fence line toward where I'd parked my car. The facility's layout worked in my favor. Multiple rows of units created a maze of sight lines that could be used for concealment or escape. Another lesson from Mom that I'd absorbed without realizing it: always know your terrain. I was almost to my car when the younger operative's radio crackled to life. "Team 2 has eyes on the target vehicle. Texas plates, matches the registration we pulled. He's definitely here." Team 2. There were more of them. I crouched behind a pickup truck parked near the office and scanned the area more carefully. Sure enough, I spotted movement near the facility's main entrance. At least 2 more figures positioned to prevent anyone from leaving by the front gate. My heart was pounding, but my mind felt strangely calm and focused. It was as if 32 years of Mom's subtle training were finally activating, giving me skills I'd never known I possessed. I could read the tactical situation, identify the threats, calculate options for escape. But more than that, I could feel the anger building. Anger at these people for threatening me, for making Mom's last years a constant struggle to protect me, for turning my entire life into a lie. I needed to get to my car, but it was now clearly being watched. The service road offered only 2 exit routes, past Team 2 at the main gate, or through a rear exit that I could see was chained shut. But there was a third option that the surveillance teams hadn't considered. The storage facility backed up against a residential neighborhood, separated only by the chain-link fence and a narrow drainage ditch. If I could reach the fence line without being spotted, I might be able to climb over and disappear into the suburban streets beyond. It would mean leaving my car behind, but cars could be replaced. Lives couldn't. I began moving carefully from unit to unit, using the buildings as cover while I worked my way toward the back fence. The afternoon heat was making the metal units radiate warmth like ovens, and sweat was stinging my eyes, but I forced myself to move slowly and deliberately. Rush, and you make mistakes. Another of Mum's lessons. I was 3 units away from the fence when I heard footsteps approaching my position. The casual operative was conducting a systematic search, checking behind each row of storage units. At his current pace, he'd reach my hiding spot in less than 2 minutes. That's when I noticed the ladder. A maintenance ladder was bolted to the side of one of the larger storage units, leading up to what appeared to be some kind of ventilation system on the roof. It wasn't an ideal escape route, but it would get me above the sightlines and give me a better view of the tactical situation. I climbed quickly, but quietly, testing each rung before putting my full weight on it. The metal was hot enough to burn through my shirt, but I ignored the discomfort and focused on reaching the roof before the search pattern brought the operative to my former hiding spot. From the roof, I had a commanding view of the entire facility. I could see all 4 members of the surveillance team now, 2 at the front gate, 2 working their way through the storage units. But I could also see something they'd apparently missed, a service road that ran along the far side of the residential neighborhood, connecting to a major street about half a mile away. More importantly, I could see that their positioning was designed to contain someone inside the facility, not to prevent someone from escaping over the back fence. They'd set up their perimeter too close, creating a gap in their coverage that I could exploit. I moved carefully across the roof, staying low to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. The adjoining storage unit had a lower roofline that would allow me to drop down closer to the fence line. From there, it would be a short sprint to the chain-link barrier and whatever lay beyond. I was preparing to make the jump to the lower roof when my phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made my blood freeze. "Stop running. Your mother's killers are in that facility right now. If you want the truth about Eleanor Hartman's death, meet me at the Riverside Diner on Highway 183 in 1 hour. Come alone, or people you care about will start dying. A friend. Killers." The word hit me like a physical blow. Mom's death hadn't been natural after all. Someone had murdered her, and now they were here, presumably to clean up loose ends. The 4 operatives below weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to eliminate the last witness to whatever they'd done to Mom. The text message changed everything. Running would keep me alive in the short term, but it wouldn't get me answers. And if these people were willing to kill Mom after decades of loyal service, they wouldn't hesitate to go after anyone else I cared about to ensure my silence. My friends, my co-workers, even my neighbors could become collateral damage in a war I'd never asked to join. I looked back towards storage unit 247, where the suit was now examining the contents Mom had so carefully organized. He was looking through her files, probably searching for evidence that could compromise his organization. The casual operative had finished his search pattern and was reporting back through his radio that the target wasn't in the facility. But I was still here, and I had information they didn't know I possessed. More importantly, I had the key to the safety deposit box and access to resources Mom had prepared for exactly this situation. The hunted could become the hunter if I was smart enough and brave enough to turn the tables. I made my decision. Instead of running, I would disappear temporarily and use the hour before the diner meeting to access Mom's emergency protocols. If someone wanted to play games with my life, they were about to discover that Eleanor Hartman had raised her son very well indeed. I dropped down to the lower roof and then to the ground behind the fence line, moving quickly through the drainage ditch toward the residential neighborhood. Behind me, I could hear the operative still searching for a target who was no longer there, still following a plan that had just become obsolete. As I walked through the quiet suburban streets toward where I could catch a bus to downtown Austin, I felt something shift inside me. The normal life Mom had tried to preserve was ending, whether I wanted it to or not. But maybe it was time to discover what kind of man Elena Kowalski's son could become when he stopped pretending to be someone else. The brass key felt warm in my pocket, heavy with possibilities. In less than an hour, I would either get the answers I needed or walk into a trap that would end everything Mom had worked so hard to protect. Either way, the game was about to change, and for the first time since discovering the storage unit, I felt ready to play it on my own terms. The First National Bank of Austin sat in the heart of downtown, a granite and glass monument to financial security that felt ironically appropriate given the circumstances. I'd taken 3 different buses and walked through 2 shopping centers to get here, using every counter-surveillance technique Mom had taught me without my realizing it. By the time I approached the bank's safety deposit box entrance, I was reasonably confident I hadn't been followed. The key fit perfectly into box 247. Mum's consistent attention to detail extended even to her emergency preparations. Inside, I found exactly what the Swiss letter had promised: a secure satellite phone, sleek and black, along with a thick envelope marked "Read First" in Mom's handwriting. I pocketed the phone and opened the envelope in the privacy of the small viewing room the bank provided. Inside was another letter from Mum, but this one was different. Urgent, practical, written like a field manual rather than a confession. Michael, if you're reading this, the situation has deteriorated beyond my ability to control it. The phone contains one programmed number that will connect you to people who worked with me for 30 years. They can be trusted, but only to a point. They have their own agenda, and you are not their primary concern. More importantly, there are others who know the truth about what happened to me and who will be coming for you next. A man calling himself Marcus Chen may attempt contact. He was my handler for the final decade of my service. Chen is not his real name, and his loyalties are complicated. He may try to recruit you or eliminate you, depending on what serves his purposes. The person you can trust is someone I never told you about, your father's younger brother, David. He didn't die in Vietnam, as I told you. He's been working parallel operations for a different agency, and he's been watching over you from a distance your entire life. I kept you separated for security reasons, but if you're in immediate danger, he can be reached through the emergency contact system I've established. To activate his contact protocol, go to the Riverside Diner on Highway 183. You'll understand why this location was chosen when you see him. Order a coffee black and tell the waitress you're waiting for Uncle Dave. He'll find you. Trust your instincts, sweetheart. I taught you to read people and situations better than you know. And remember, in this world, everyone lies about something, but the quality of their lies tells you everything about who they really are. You're stronger than you think, and you have allies you've never met. But the most important thing is this: you get to choose who you become. You don't have to be Elena Kowalski's son or Eleanor Hartman's boy. You can be Michael, whoever that turns out to be. All my love, Mom, Uncle Dave. I had an uncle I'd never known existed, someone who'd been watching over me for 32 years without my knowledge. The revelation should have been shocking, but at this point, I was beginning to expect surprises. What caught my attention was Mom's warning about the meeting at the Riverside Diner. She'd known someone would try to use that location, and she'd prepared for it. I left the bank and caught a taxi to Highway 183, arriving at the Riverside Diner 20 minutes before the appointed time. The building was classic Americana: chrome fixtures, red vinyl booths, and a neon sign that had probably been flickering for decades. It was the kind of place where truckers, shift workers, and insomniacs could get coffee and conversation at any hour of the day or night. I chose a booth with clear sight lines to both entrances and ordered coffee from a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the Carter administration. When I added that I was waiting for Uncle Dave, her expression didn't change, but I caught her glancing toward the kitchen with what might have been recognition. I didn't have to wait long. A man in his late 50s emerged from the kitchen, wearing a cook's apron over civilian clothes. He was shorter than my father had been, with graying brown hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested a lifetime of outdoor work. But when he looked at me, I saw familiar eyes, the same green eyes I'd inherited from Dad. "Michael," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. His voice carried a slight accent that I couldn't place. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Eleanor wanted to keep you separated from all this until it was over." "You're David Hartman?" I asked, though the family resemblance made the question somewhat redundant. "David Kowalski now, actually. I took Elena's original surname when I went underground in '78. It seemed appropriate, given that we were both living lives that weren't quite real." He signaled the waitress for coffee. "Eleanor told you about the storage unit?" I nodded. "She left letters, instructions. She said you've been watching me from a distance." Elena was right to keep us separated. If our enemies had connected us, they could have used either one of us against the other. But with her gone, he paused as the waitress delivered his coffee. "The protection she built around you is starting to crumble People are asking questions about what you might know, what she might have told you. Did you send the text message about meeting here? David's expression darkened. No. That means someone else knows about the protocols Elena established. Someone who wanted to draw you out into the open. He glanced around the diner, his gaze lingering on the other customers. We need to move. This place isn't safe anymore. As if summoned by his words, the front door chimed, and two men entered. I recognized them immediately. The suit and his casual partner from the storage facility. They'd found us, somehow bypassing all the counter-surveillance measures I'd thought I was taking. Don't look directly at them, David said quietly. Finish your coffee like nothing's wrong. There's a back exit through the kitchen. But before we could move, a third figure entered through the rear door, a distinguished Asian man in an expensive overcoat despite the Texas heat. He walked directly to our booth and sat down without invitation, smiling pleasantly as if he were joining old friends for dinner. Mr. Hartman, he said, extending his hand. Marcus Chen. I believe your mother mentioned me. I didn't take his hand. She said your loyalties were complicated. Elena always was direct. Chen's smile never wavered. She also said you were intelligent. I'm hoping that intelligence extends to understanding your current situation. David hadn't moved or spoken, but I could see tension in his posture, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. The two operatives from the storage facility had taken positions near the front door, effectively blocking that exit. Other customers in the diner were beginning to look uncomfortable, sensing the undercurrent of tension even if they couldn't identify its source. What situation would that be? I asked Chen. You've accessed Elena's emergency protocols. You've seen the files she maintained. You understand that she was murdered to prevent her from exposing certain operations that have become inconvenient for some powerful people. Chen's voice remained conversational, but his eyes were cold. Those same people believe you now possess information that could damage them. They're not going to simply hope you'll keep quiet. And what do you believe? I believe Elena was too smart to leave her son completely defenseless. I believe she taught you more than you realize, and gave you resources you haven't discovered yet. Most importantly, I believe you're going to need allies if you want to survive the next week. David finally spoke. What are you offering? Protection, answers, justice for Elena's death if that's what Michael wants. Chen turned back to me. But it comes with a price. Elena spent 30 years trying to give you a normal life. If you accept my help, that life ends permanently. You become part of this world whether you want to or not. I looked around the diner, taking in the surreal scene. 2 hours ago, I'd been a normal accountant whose biggest worry was whether to ask out the new receptionist at work. Now I was sitting in a diner with an uncle I'd never met, and a spy master I'd been warned not to trust, while armed operatives blocked the exits, and my entire future hung in the balance. What happened to my mother? I asked Chen directly. She was poisoned. Slow acting, designed to mimic cardiac failure. Very professional, very clean, the kind of thing that leaves no evidence unless you know what to look for. Who ordered it? Someone who believed Elena was about to expose Operation Sanctuary to congressional investigators. Someone who couldn't risk having their involvement in illegal arms sales and money laundering revealed to the public. David leaned forward. You have proof of this? Elena left proof. She was careful, methodical, paranoid in the best possible way. She documented everything, recorded conversations, maintained copies of financial records that certain people thought had been destroyed years ago. Chen's smile turned predatory. The question is whether Michael wants to use that proof to destroy the people who killed his mother, or whether he wants to spend the rest of his life running from them. I thought about Mom's letter, her words about choosing who I wanted to become. She'd spent decades living a double life to protect me, sacrificing her own happiness to ensure I could have a normal existence. But normal was no longer an option. The moment I'd opened that storage unit, I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I want justice, I said finally, but I want it on my terms, not yours. Chen nodded approvingly. Elena taught you well. Very well, Michael. What are your terms? Before I could answer, David grabbed my arm. We need to go. Now. Through the diner's windows, I could see more vehicles arriving in the parking lot. Black SUVs moving with the same deliberate precision I'd observed at the storage facility. Whatever game Chen was playing, it had attracted the attention of people who preferred more direct solutions. Gentlemen, Chen said, standing calmly, I believe our conversation will have to be continued elsewhere. Michael, the secure phone your mother left you, use it when you're ready to hear what she really discovered before she died. But don't wait too long. Her enemies are running out of patience. As Chen walked casually toward the back exit, David pulled me in the opposite direction toward the kitchen. There's a service tunnel that connects to the building next door, he explained. Eleanor and I scouted this location years ago, just in case. Behind us, I could hear the front door chiming repeatedly as more operatives entered the diner. Shouts erupted as they realized their targets were no longer in the building. We had maybe minutes before they figured out our escape route. As we descended into a maintenance tunnel that smelled of grease and industrial cleaning supplies, I realized that my education in my mother's world was far from complete. She'd left me tools and allies, but she'd also left me enemies who wouldn't hesitate to kill to protect their secrets. The tunnel was dark and narrow, lit only by David's flashlight as we moved toward whatever sanctuary he'd prepared. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit were growing closer. Ahead lay answers I wasn't sure I was ready to hear, and choices that would determine whether I honored my mother's sacrifice or repeated her mistakes. But for the first time since discovering the storage unit, I felt like I was moving forward instead of simply reacting. The game was still being played on other people's terms, but I was beginning to understand the rules, and once I fully understood them, I could start writing some rules of my own. The maintenance tunnel led to the basement of an automotive repair shop 3 blocks from the diner. David moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone who'd used this route before, navigating around pipes and electrical conduits, while I stumbled along behind him. When we finally emerged through a concealed entrance behind a stack of tires, I felt like we'd traveled through some kind of portal between worlds. Elena and I established this as a safe house 15 years ago, David explained, as he led me through the empty shop toward a staircase at the back. The owner is sympathetic to people who need to disappear for legitimate reasons. The apartment above the shop was spartanly furnished, but comfortable, with blackout curtains and electronic equipment that looked more sophisticated than anything I'd seen outside of movies. David activated several devices with practiced efficiency, signal jammers, I realized, designed to prevent electronic surveillance. "Now we can talk freely," he said, settling into a chair across from me. "And you can ask the questions I know you have." I had so many questions that I hardly knew where to start. "How long have you been watching me?" "Since you were born." Eleanor and I maintained separate operations, but we coordinated when it came to your security. I was the backup plan. If anything happened to her, if the cover was blown, if you needed extraction, she never wanted to use me, but she needed to know you'd be protected. "What kind of operations?" David was quiet for a long moment, seemingly weighing how much truth I could handle. Elena worked primarily in financial intelligence, tracking money flows, exposing corruption, helping good people disappear and bad people get caught. I worked the other side of the same coin, direct action, asset recovery, occasionally removing people who posed threats to national security. You killed people, when necessary, when they were actively harming innocent civilians and couldn't be stopped any other way. His voice was matter-of-fact, without apology or pride. Elena handled the complex financial puzzles. I handled the simple moral equations. I thought about the files I'd seen in the storage unit, the web of connections and operations spanning decades. What was Operation Sanctuary really about? Exactly what it appeared to be: a network for protecting whistleblowers, dissidents, journalists, and their families, people who'd exposed corruption or human rights abuses and needed to disappear before they were silenced permanently. David stood up and moved to a filing cabinet, retrieving a thick folder. But like most operations, it attracted the attention of people who wanted to use it for less noble purposes. He handed me the folder. Inside were photographs, financial records, and surveillance reports documenting what appeared to be a systematic corruption of Mom's network. Over the past 5 years, someone had been using Sanctuary's infrastructure to move criminals instead of victims, to launder money for arms dealers instead of protecting journalists, to eliminate witnesses instead of saving them. Elena discovered the corruption 18 months ago, David continued. She'd been building a case, documenting everything, preparing to expose the people who'd perverted her life's work. That's what got her killed. The photographs showed familiar faces from Mom's corkboard, but in different contexts. Marcus Chen appeared in several images, meeting with people who were clearly not refugees or whistleblowers. Katerina Volkov was documented receiving payments from sources connected to international arms trafficking. Even the mysterious director appeared in surveillance photos, finally revealed as a senior official in what appeared to be a congressional office. "Chen offered to help me get justice," I said. Was he lying? Probably not entirely. Chen's motivations are complex. He genuinely cared about Elena and he's angry about her death, but he's also trying to save an operation that's become compromised, and he'll sacrifice you if it serves the greater good. David pulled out another document. This is Elena's real insurance policy. Complete financial records for every illegal transaction run through Sanctuary over the past 5 years. Bank accounts, transaction logs, recorded conversations, even video evidence of meetings between corrupt officials and criminal organizations. I stared at the document, understanding its implications. This could bring down governments. Parts of them, anyway. Elena didn't just document the corruption. She documented who knew about it, who authorized it, and who profited from it. There are senators, federal judges, intelligence officials, even foreign diplomats who could go to prison for decades based on what she collected. And now they want to eliminate the evidence. They want to eliminate anyone who might use the evidence. Elena's dead. You're the only person left who has access to her complete files and the credibility to make accusations stick. David sat back down, his expression grave. That's why running isn't really an option. They'll never stop hunting you as long as you pose a threat to their operations. I thought about Chen's offer, about Mom's letters, about the choice she'd said I could make about who I wanted to become. What are my real options? 3 possibilities as I see it. First, you can disappear completely. New identity, new life, permanent exile from everything you've ever known. I can make that happen, but you'd be looking over your shoulder forever, and they'd keep trying to track you down. Second option, you can make a deal with Chen or someone like him. Turn over Elena's evidence in exchange for protection and a place in their organization. You'd be trading your independence for safety, becoming part of the same system that killed your mother. And the third option, David smiled grimly. You can do what Elena would have done, use the evidence to expose the corruption, destroy the people who perverted Sanctuary's mission, and rebuild the network to serve its original purpose. It's the most dangerous option, but it's also the only one that honors what she died for. I walked to the window and looked out at the Austin skyline, thinking about the woman who'd raised me. Eleanor Hartman had been quiet, careful, conventional. But Elena Kowalski had been a warrior, someone who'd spent decades fighting to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She'd given me the choice of which person to be, but she'd also given me the tools to be effective in either role. If I choose the third option, what would that actually involve? First, we'd need to secure Eleanor's complete files. Not just what was in the storage unit, but the backup copies she maintained in multiple locations. Then we'd need to document the current state of Sanctuary's corruption, identify all the players involved, and gather enough evidence to make prosecutions stick. That sounds like it could take months, or years. Elena spent 18 months just documenting what she'd discovered, and that was with insider access to the network. Building a legal case that could survive challenges from some of the most powerful people in Washington, it's not going to be quick or easy. And in the meantime, people are trying to kill me. Yes, which is why you'd need to learn to protect yourself more effectively than Elena could teach you while maintaining your cover. You'd need to become someone who could operate in this world without getting destroyed by it. I thought about the skills I'd already discovered I possessed, the training Mum had given me without my realizing it. You could teach me. Elena and I could teach you together. She left detailed training protocols along with everything else. Combat skills, surveillance techniques, electronic warfare, even psychological manipulation. She wanted you to have the option of becoming someone who could survive in her world if you chose to enter it. The secure phone in my pocket felt heavier as I considered the implications. I could use it to call Chen, to negotiate some kind of deal that would keep me alive at the cost of my freedom. Or I could use it to activate Mom's network, to begin the process of exposing the corruption she'd died trying to reveal. David, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you regret the life you've lived, the things you've had to do? He was quiet for a long time, looking out the same window I'd been staring through. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that there are people in the world who make such choices inevitable. But I don't regret protecting innocent people from predators, even when the methods were unpleasant. Eleanor felt the same way. Eleanor believed that good people have an obligation to act when they have the power to prevent evil. She spent 30 years acting on that belief, even when it cost her the normal life she wanted with your father and with you. I pulled out the secure phone and stared at its blank screen. One call could change everything, could set me on a path that would either honor my mother's sacrifice or get me killed trying to follow in her footsteps. But doing nothing meant accepting that her death was meaningless, that the corruption she'd died to expose would continue unchallenged. If I make this call, I said, if I choose to fight instead of run, will you help me? Elena was the closest thing to a sister I ever had. She died protecting something she believed in, and she trusted me to help you finish what she started, if you chose to take up her mission." David stood up and moved to another filing cabinet, retrieving what appeared to be a comprehensive training manual. "I'll help you become someone who can survive in this world and change it for the better. But I won't lie to you about the costs. This path will require you to do things that normal people never have to do, to see things that will change you permanently, to make choices that will weigh on your conscience for the rest of your life. And if I succeed, if I expose the corruption and rebuild Sanctuary the way Mom intended, then you'll have honored the woman who raised you and protected thousands of people who desperately need help. You'll have turned Elena Kowalski's sacrifice into something meaningful and lasting." I thought about Mom's final letter, her words about choosing who I wanted to become. For 32 years I'd been Michael Hartman, accountant, living a quiet life in Dallas. But Michael Hartman had been built on foundations of lies and deceptions, protected by a mother's love and an uncle's vigilance. Now I had the opportunity to become someone new, someone who knew the truth about where he'd come from and what he was capable of achieving. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely irreversible. I activated the secure phone and dialed the only number programmed into it. "This is Michael," I said when someone answered. "I'm Elena Kowalski's son, and I want to finish what she started." The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "We've been expecting your call. Are you ready to begin your real education?" I looked at David, who nodded encouragingly, and then at the training manual he'd placed on the table between us. Outside, the sun was setting over Austin, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that reminded me of the storage unit where this journey had begun. "I'm ready," I said, and for the first time since reading the will that had started this whole adventure, I truly was. 3 months later, I stood in a congressional hearing room, raising my right hand to swear an oath to tell the truth about Operation Sanctuary and the people who had corrupted it. The evidence Mom had gathered, combined with what David and I had collected in the weeks that followed, had been enough to trigger investigations that would reshape American intelligence operations for decades to come. Marcus Chen sat in the witness chair beside me, finally ready to tell the complete truth about the network he'd helped build and the criminals who'd destroyed it. Katerina Volkov was already in federal custody, along with a dozen other operatives who'd used Sanctuary's infrastructure for personal profit. And somewhere in a secure facility outside Washington, a man who'd called himself director was learning that Elena Kowalski's son had inherited more than just her intelligence and determination. He'd inherited her commitment to justice, no matter the personal cost. The normal life Mom had tried to preserve was gone forever. But in its place, I'd found something better, a purpose worth fighting for, allies worth trusting, and the knowledge that even in a world full of shadows and secrets, good people could still make a difference if they were brave enough to act. Eleanor Hartman's son might have lived quietly in Dallas, content with his small corner of the world, but Elena Kowalski's son had work to do, people to protect, corruption to expose, and a network to rebuild in service of its original mission. The choice had been mine to make, just as Mom had promised, and I'd chosen to honor both the woman who'd raised me and the warrior who'd died protecting everything she'd built in my name.